Oh yes, it's happy times and places in which that tedious bloke who's on all the DVDs wangs on in a positive way about an episode of Doctor Who. He has a guest who's chosen his... Why am I saying he? It's me. I've got a guest who's chosen positive things, and I need to choose the positive things too.
Hello, my name's Stephen Hatcher. I'm the coordinator of the Hoover's Doctor Who group based in Derby, and for the last 11 years I've been the organiser of the Hooverville convention, and for the last couple of years we've also been organising Big Finish Day in conjunction with our friends at Big Finish. Toby, what I've got for you is the Sea Devils.
Well, hello everybody. I hope you're in a happy time and place. I'm watching Doctor Who and the Sea Devils with Steve Hatcher of the Derby Hoovers, who organises conventions and is an all-round lovely fellow. He has a bit of a naval connection. His dad was a man of the sea. I have no such connection whatsoever. All I have are my childhood memories of first the book, then the bootleg, then the 1992, something like that, repeat, and now just the fact that it's, part of the whole great tapestry of classic Who, and the monsters themselves have recently been revisited in Legend of the Sea Devils. So they're very much in the air, which smells, of salt water and reptilian flesh. So look, Steve chose the Sea Fort for episode 1. I chose the Clangers. Let's see if we can be in accord. I just have to... I'm watching on BritBox, where it did that slightly odd thing with episode 2, where it started doing it very slowly. So I'm going to start it from the beginning again. And we are going to press play, or select, or whatever you would like to do, in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. I love this title sequence, and there was something lovely about when these were repeated, because of course when you got them on bootlegs, certainly the first couple of seconds was very it was never very clean cut, and the colours always went a bit everywhere because the title sequence is very colourful. That was one of the least good quality parts of the story, but you didn't really care because the title sequence was the title sequence. But then actually when it's repeated, and you see that opening and those reds so vivid and not bleeding and in such good quality, you go, oh hang on, this is going to look fresh and newly minted, and it does. So yes, here's Declan Mulholland, Jabba the Hutt. I remember that I first saw the humanoid Jabba the Hutt. There was a program in the daytime about Star Wars. I can't remember, and it showed the clip, and it was probably before I'd even seen the film, actually, because I was quite late to the film. I saw Return of the Jedi first in the cinema and had to wait for the others to come on the telly. And I saw this clip of Harrison Ford with a larger bloke, and he was Jabba the Hutt, and it was only discovered later reading what happened, and that Declan was cast as a human Jabba the Hutt. And that scene wasn't used, and then it's used in the special edition, but Declan is CGI'd out. So he's a piece of Star Wars history without appearing in Star Wars. Didn't stop him appearing at conventions though. He died on a train, I believe, and I think he was quite a man of the theatre. Hugh talks about him, I think, in the interview. I think, yeah, and he's of course Till in the Androids of Tara. He's the sort of hunchback servant in the Androids of Tara, which is very much a part up his street. And he's also in Quatermass, the Euston Films 1979, where he plays a sort of guard at a television studio. I know he cropped up in. I remember seeing him in the Britass Empire. He was still working and going strong when this was being repeated. He was still very much of the acting landscape, and he's a very recognisable face and a very welcome actor. And he's the person that coins the term sea devil, which even in Legend of the Sea Devils, even though in this episode they go great pains to go, all these names we use for them are wrong, and even the name they come up with, I believe, the Eocenes, is still scientifically wrong. But sea devils is a bit of a pejorative term, isn't it? And I quite like in Legend of the Sea Devils how, its rejoinder is to call us land parasites, because I love the fact that Pertwee is such a gent, because he greets the Silurian, doesn't he, in Doctor and the Silurians, by trying to shake his hand, and there is something charming about. I know sometimes Pertwee can be a little bit, establishment figure and all that sort of thing, but that goes hand in hand with, old school, old world etiquette. That yes, probably has its, its roots in a lot of bad things, like empire, and the fact that the establishment have good manners to hide some, to cover up for some of the terrible things that go on underneath the surface. But I don't think that's unique to the British establishment. I nonetheless, whilst accepting, look at that brilliant, the angle of the corridor shot, just to give us a little bit of disorientation. I love it. Not to ignore any of the hypocrisies or contradictions of how we view our past. I think Pertwee's sort of charm and etiquette, and the way he addresses people in a proper way, and indeed tries to shake their hand, and there, with the Sea Devil, he reacts with shock but maintains his composure to try and go, I want to help you, is not only a wonderful, arresting juxtaposition, strange alienness confronted with English unflappability, but also, it sums up the Doctor, that he won't be put off by something that is odd and that is different, and will maintain his composure and try to negotiate the peaceful solution. This is brilliantly shot, brilliantly lit. Well done, Mike Jeffries. And all just this. Of course, we can't see the window. All of that sound, the smashing of the window is great. I love the Sea Devil's cry, which you also get when it's going across the minefield in episode 4, don't you? I love that sort of throaty alien cry, because we don't often hear aliens sort of scream, because it undermines their scariness, but it is quite sort of strange. I always liked it when I discovered that the 60s Daleks would sort of cry out in pain or whatever, which my Daleks had never done, and it seemed, oh crikey, very very unsettling and odd, and I like it when Doctor Who is odd and weird, and this is all charming. I mean, I've barely mentioned the Doctor and Joe. I love the way they were with the Master in episode 1, where the Doctor is quite compassionate, but also I think he doesn't shake his hand, does he? And he rejects him, but with manners, and I love the way that Joe is with the Master, and the way that Joe is with the Doctor. They have such a good relationship. He does, yes, we know that he occasionally patronises her and shouts at her, but when they have these sort of moments of charm, and often the joke is on the Doctor. I mean, the joke is on the Doctor here, isn't it? When he tries to mend the radio, there's nothing I love more than the Doctor tinkering with wires and trying. I think that the Doctor is how we try and get through life. We at our best, we have a series of things we try and make the best of, and quite often end up blowing them up or ruining them, but at least we have a bash. I think a lot of how the Doctor behaves is a metaphor for how we guide ourselves through life, if you have a worldview that is one of slightly sort of rueful pessimism, as I do. But there's a sense of humour about it. There's no point in being pissed off. You may as well have a laugh. And it's because of a 6-parter, you get the chance to sort of explain And it's interesting because he says, the person that named them that, he doesn't go, Dr. Quinn, whom I met at the blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, because it doesn't want to get too, bogged. It doesn't want to alienate people to go, I didn't, now if you did that, I think you would name check and say the who's and what's. He's much more vague about it because he knows it was a couple of years ago. And he doesn't need to go to the details. He doesn't need to recall the exact details of Doctor and the Silurians because people will only remember sort of it vaguely enough. That's Michael Bryant as the voice going Oscar Bravo Tango, I think.
Hello, Oscar Bravo Tango speaking. Who are you? Who are you? Over.
Yeah. So, so he didn't actually blow it up for once. Oh, does he blow it up now? Yes, that's right. He blows it up now. I knew he blew it up at some point. There would be no point in having the Doctor do a thing without blowing it up. Yes, he presses the button now. I love that. There's nothing Pertwee judges that perfectly. It's a very good comic double take that without sending it up. I actually believed he was pissed off then. Glorious. I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for a load of wire hanging out the back of a thing and the Doctor hopefully sort of rigging it all up. Clive Morton is... Oh, look at the Master in his naval gear. He looks $1 million. He was such an effortlessly elegant man, wasn't he? What a handsome devil, but a darkly handsome devil. There's a menace there. Apparently, of course, yes, absolutely charming, wonderful. But my God, I bet he looked $1 million, whatever he dressed in. He just a man of effortless panache and... My brother's my brother's only a couple of inches taller than me, if that. But you dress him in, shirts and a jacket he's got from Oxfam, and he deports himself well. He's got very good, gait and comportment. You give me a £10,000 suit. I've never been anywhere near a £10,000 suit, but if you put me in one, I'd still look like I'd fallen out of a tumble dryer, and and within minutes I'd get something on it. It's one of my, there's some of that stuff that you can't, I don't think, unless you go to finishing school. But I think there are certain innate qualities that not even your genes can necessarily dictate, because I share a lot of my brother's DNA, and yet he has style, much like Delgado here, who I just think looks absolutely terrific. And I love this, that they salute him because they think he's the genuine article. Although, are naval officers allowed beards? Yes. Oh, yes, they're certain. I don't know. I can't remember. That's a time for a podcast where somebody's thought about what they're going to say. I just remember something about, isn't there something about Commander Millington in the Curse of Fenric, where he's not allowed... He wouldn't really have been allowed a moustache, but they let him have a moustache because they wanted that Hitler image in episode 1, which is fantastic, I think. But that's another story. But I'm sure I've seen naval officers with beards. So let's go on to things I do know about, rather than... I really don't like it when podcasts go around the houses with something they don't know the answer to, because, well, if you do know it, you're just going, it's this, you idiot, and if you don't know it, you're none the wiser. I was listening to a podcast the other day and I was yelling at it, going, no, that's not correct. And they back and forth for about 5 minutes. And I thought, cut that out. I unfortunately cannot cut anything out because you are watching along. Most of you don't watch along, do you? But I still have to follow the structure of the episode. This is. Do you know what this is? So if Clive Morton wasn't so good, this would be annoying. This could be played for laughs, where Trenchard is a sort of comic bore, but actually Clive Morton is so sweet, and to the extent that that we're used to the Doctor being a bit testy, and that's interesting even of itself. It's no surprise to us that our hero is a bit, but you're sort of on Trenchard's side there, but it's when Joe does it as well. It's actually really sad, and you can see sort of why Trenchard ended up where he did. Although actually, of course, he's being cunning. He's deliberately being a bore in order to buy the Master some time. But within the lie, within the subterfuge, there is an element of truth, which is sad in itself, because he sort of knows he can sort of get away with it, because deep down perhaps he knows that he's bored. Eric Mason, who's previously been in The Mind of Evil as one of the chief prison officers, and another of those sort of actors that, I'd been kind of unaware of, and then I saw him pop up in the 270s Doctor Who's and went, oh, okay, this guy seems to have been around. And then I noticed him pop up in Michael Winner's True Crimes and various other things. Went, oh God, no, he's still around. He was also the guard in the very first English production of 12 Angry Men. So very much a sort of supporting cameo player, and yet turns up, has a decent role in the film Hot Fuzz. So just by sticking around and being part of the furniture, had a long old career, sometimes in coughs and spits, but sometimes that the role he has in Hot Fuzz is pretty decent, and it's a movie. And then I think his death wasn't even listed, but I read it in Doctor Who magazine, but it wasn't reported in a lot of the usual sources. But anyway, he had a good old career, but I'd kind of missed the boat with him until watching these stories for the second or third time. Went, oh yeah, okay, him, yeah. But he was always around. Good for him. And I like the fact that he doesn't get hypnotized by the Master there. He I think it's good that it sometimes makes it difficult for the Master. It shows that not just anybody can do it, and that even he has to sort of improvise within the situation. There's a lot of people not returning handshakes in this, but Clive Morton as Trenchard, I think, is absolutely lovely, and that's. But Joe is not uncompassionate there. And Pert was always slightly close to losing his temper, but which again, as I understand it, is not. He could be quite testy in real life, but I do think that gives his Doctor a bit of an edge, and it is of course softened by Joe. Well spotted, Joe, who this is being a very good story for at the moment. But of course, the initial reaction is that she gets dismissed and told to be quiet. And I like the fact that the Doctor accepts her at her word rather than goes, "Oh, you silly girl, it won't have been the Master." Yeah, he completely accepts it. But that's why Captain Hart is quite useful, because you don't want the Doctor being sceptical of Joe, because that would take the sort of patronising thing a little bit too far, and it would be annoying. It would be an annoying delay to the story. But what it means is that the Doctor and Joe are on the same page, but they have to now convince Captain Hart, and that we're completely bought into that. So the music is not as it's not as prominent in some places, not as jarring as I thought it might be. I love all that with the sailors and chucking the guns and all of that. The music, of course, is the headline act in Doctor Who the Music, the 12-inch vinyl record that I had and listened to over and over again in an attempt to try and think it was a bit like watching the episodes. This was before you could get them on video or anything, and I'd read about the Sea Devils Suite and about it being one of the first sort of long full compositions for a story. And I have to say, when I put it on the record, I thought that there's something wrong with the record player. I thought it was at the wrong speed. I didn't know what it... And I went, oh, no, that's... it's it sounds like a cat coughing up a fur ball whilst, DJing. And it was nothing like... It was nothing like the... the more musical radiophonic workshop stuff from the latest. That I love that in conference. That's again. You come when I'm ready for you. But he's not a bullish, officious type. but that's inherent in the role and in who he is in a way, but as as in what he represents rather than his personality. I love that. It's just a lovely little character touch of him, going about his golf and not wanting to see anybody or be interrupted. He's great. Clive Morton is the subject of a famous John Gielgud anecdote. Gielgud famously always put his foot in it, and Clive Morton was in a production with Gielgud and knocked on the dressing room door and said, "Johnny, can I have a word?" And Gielgud goes, "Oh, thank God it's you. I thought it was that terrible bore Clive Morton." But I believe Morton used to tell that anecdote against himself. Oh, bless him. He's not hugely old there. I think I don't think he's even 70 there, because I think he died only a couple of years later. Is this 70? This is made in 71. I think he died about 75. And he was only 72 when he died. I think something like that, around those figures. Look it up. But yeah, he's not as old as you'd think, and he wasn't massively long for this world in comparison. But it's a lovely performance. I think he's a very sweet character, and I Malcolm Hulke is doing interesting things. It's more prominent in the book, but the character of Trenchard is very patriotic, and that's something that Hulke would have been quite cynical about. And Hulke, as a one-time member of the Communist Party, he was very interested in sort of satirizing the British establishment and all those things of empire, and and people like Trenchard, who would have been his natural sort of political enemies, if you like. But he does it with compassion. I think it's a good writer who. It's easy to satirize the Colonel Blimp, and to have made Trenchard an idiot and unlikable, and probably thrown in a bit of racism into the mix if you wanted to. I mean, that would be the shorthand these days, I think, which in itself is becoming a bit of a lazy shorthand. I think we need to. I think most of us, are on board with the idea that racism is bad. So. We need more interesting shorthands for villainy than nationalism, and patriotism. I think is very interesting because it's an understandable drive in many ways, and the fact that it is used against. That's a lovely callback to the Gulf. The fact that it's used against Trenchard. Says a lot about him, a lot about what the Master understands, a lot about what Trenchard represents. But it's ultimately rather compassionate, and ultimately, and although the book has a sting in the tail, and that in itself is something that will gives it an extra little bit of colour that we'll talk about in episode 4. I've already mentioned in episode 1, Trenchard's death when it happens. Has a bittersweet piece of comedy about it, but I think you get a lot of that from Clive Morton's performance, which I think is has a real sadness about it. But he's not sad himself, but he what he represents, and it's compassionately done by Hulke, who I think just judges the satire just right. And we're about to have a wonderfully long fight scene, which again, when you're watching this in not great quality, it's just a bit like, oh, come on, get on with the story. But actually, it's it's actually very nicely it's very nicely put together, and the Master is doubled for some of the shots by Derek Ware. Now, Derek told me it's because Roger Delgado had hurt himself in a car accident, but I don't know if he. So that's Derek with his back to us now. Derek Ware, excellent stuntman, the founder of Havoc, and just a lovely chap. One of the first Doctor Who people I met, actually, Derek. There was a fight prize named after him at RADA, but unfortunately he was scuppered by the fact that new rules introduced around this time meant that you couldn't be a stuntman and an agent. So the Havoc agency was suddenly not allowed to be giving work to other stunt people. And it just and he never quite. He was always a bit bitter about that, Derek, unfortunately, which is a shame because he was a lovely, very helpful man and very good at his job. And one of the first Doctor Who people I interviewed, as it were. I left a questionnaire for him. But then I worked with him subsequently. He'd been to my house for tea. And of course, I did the Havoc documentary with him. So but I'd met him first, but I'd seen him first because my brother had been doing some, a little piece in a theatre piece that. So I saw him chopping off the heads of, I can't remember who the actors were now. One was Stephen Watson, who was a marshman, who's no longer with us, young actor. But yes, so I don't know if Delgado had a car accident or whether Derek was mixing that up with the fact that subsequently Roger Delgado sadly died in a car accident. But he certainly suggested that Delgado had injured his ribs, I think, or something. And I think this is a terrific. That's great. That's great. That's just $1 million. That I love that. And I remember my girlfriend at the time. So I was at sixth form college when this was repeated. I remember her watching the Sea Devils and thinking it was pretty good, and I remember her enjoying that cliffhanger, going, "Wow, that was really good." And of course, if a lady, particularly one in whom you're, romantically smitten, also likes Doctor Who, I think perhaps then that once this repeat season was over, we then still had to watch Doctor Who once a week. Was one of that's. The things we do when we're younger. I think it's all right to separate business and pleasure, and I'll let you decide which was my girlfriend and which of those was Doctor Who. But anyway, good. Thanks, Rachel, for watching the Sea Devils with me and letting us continue our Doctor Who watch after that. And I'm glad you liked the Sea Devils. She's very happy now because she's not with me. We are Facebook friends, though, so that's nice. I shouldn't think she... I wonder if she does watch Doctor Who now. Who knows? Listen up. So, what do I like about... Well, I like a lot about that. The cliffhanger is excellent, but there's a lot of good cliffhangers. I think I'm putting it out there so I don't forget. Sometimes when I get to the bonus thing, I'm terrible, and I suddenly panic and everything goes out of my head, and I go, "Oh, I like those shoes." I think maybe the cliffhangers might be my bonus thing, because that first cliffhanger was great. That one's superb. The one for episode 4 is terrific. It does well for cliffhangers, this story. So I might choose because I could have chosen the cliffhanger for that. I love Pertwee eating his sandwich. I love all of that. I'm a sucker for that, because there's a bit in Day of the Daleks, isn't there, where he has a scrap whilst drinking a glass of whiskey. Cool AF, as the modern people say. I do like the Gulf in Conference. And Trenchard. I think Trenchard is absolutely lovely. The Master in naval uniform, I love. I think the Doctor and Joe. And the wires and the exploding radio. What is not to love about the Doctor's greeting to the Sea Devil, where he basically goes, "Oh my God, here's an alien monster point with a gun. I'm going to say, how can I help you?" I love that. And the fact that Pertwee does it, with sort of a look of, he's got shock on his face, but he's trying to maintain his composure. It's beautifully judged. Oh, I love this. Don't you love this? Don't you love this? It's not a story that's ever been in my top 10s or even a 10 out of 10 or anything like that. And it's from an era, as I say, which was always a little bit of a disappointment to me because of, the shadow of the Target books. I'm loving this. I think it's a brilliant production. I think it's got enough about it that I think sometimes that sort of Let's Sticks Pertwee is a little bit samey feeling. But as I go back to it, no, each I think it's because I watched a lot of them at around the same time. Actually, you go back to each one. I did Curse of Peladon not long ago, and that has a unique flavour to it. And this again has so many sort of little visual touches, and certainly the music, there's sort of, audio touches to it, the sound design, well done, Tony Millier, that mark it out, and obviously the sea setting as well. This is wonderful. I'm loving this. But what to choose? The Doctor and his wires. I like that. I'm going back to Trenchard and his golf. But just the character, because and I think they did do well with that scene where he's buying the Master Time, which could have been slightly an annoying, awkward comedy where nobody's quite. Where you go, well, no, but somebody would just say, "Oh, get lost. This is too transparent." And I think they actually judged that whole potentially quite difficult scene well. The Doctor and Joe's embarrassment is it's almost quite touching in places. You feel sorry for him, even though actually he is pulling the wool over their eyes. So don't quite patronise him. He may be an old bluffer, but he's actually being calculating. So it works on a number of levels. And I like the sword fight and the sandwich. So shall I say Trenchard? Because we might actually get Trenchard for episode 4, but if I choose something for, say, episode 2 that Steve chooses for episode 4, I still get the point for that. That's not cheating. It's still massively loaded against me. Unless he, chooses a particular moment of Trenchard's in episode 4, which is unique to episode 4, in which case I can't have it. But I will choose Trenchard, but I will also, I think that umbrella covers, the Gulf scene and the bluffing scene, which isn't a particular favourite, but I think it could have not worked, and they make it work. So hats off to that. But all of that, I think, touches upon the fact that Trenchard and Clive Morton are a very strong element of the story, although I wonder if he's going to choose the Master in naval uniform, because God, Delgado looks so good. Right, what's Steve going to choose?
My thing for episode 2 is Trenchard. Colonel Trenchard, played by Clive Morton.
Yes!
And this particular performance always, for me, brings back memories of one of my very favourite films, Kind Hearts and Coronets, which also features Clive Morton playing a prison governor. Of all things, it's there he is tending to Dennis Price in his last moments before he is due to be executed, and then letting him go on as the pardon comes down. So Clive Morton. Trenchard is an ex-colonial type who feels very hard done by, and deep down he knows he's been betrayed by the empire he's dedicated himself to. Now this feeling of deep dissatisfaction with how his life's turned out allows him to excuse anything in his own behaviour if he can rationalise that he's acting for his country, and that makes him easy meat for the Master, as the Doctor points out to Captain Hart. His weak point is his patriotism, so he's very easy. People who tend to have that unthinking patriotism tend to be very easy prey for people to whisper in their ears and turn those feelings into something nasty, and that's precisely what happens with Trenchard. The Master manipulates him, and then when he doesn't need him anymore, he casts him aside. And at the end, does Trenchard realise what's been happening? Possibly, possibly not. But by the time he realises that he's been lied to, in a sense, well, he has been lied to, in episode 4, there isn't time for him to be redeemed, merely to die bravely but futilely, which is a bit of a metaphor for the end of the British Empire from the staunchly anti-imperialist Malcolm Hulke. I love Malcolm Hulke's stories. He's, as I think almost everybody knows, he was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, as indeed was I, and well, I continue to be. So Malcolm Hulke, someone I've got a lot of time for as a writer, and I like his politics as well. So that's my thing from episode 2, Trenchard.
That's very interesting, and that's, of course, I knew Steve was a gentleman of the left, and that's this is why it's great when people choose a story and they bring that very much their own. So Steve, we've got the naval thing, we've also got his connection with Malcolm Hulke's politics. I find that interesting. I too am of the left. I don't think I'm as far left as Steve. But whereas when I was younger, the jabs at Trenchard were very much my meat and drink, because I like, well, patriotism. What is it? The last refuge of the scoundrel. It's foolish, and it is. And what Steve very rightly put. I say it is. I'm going to add nuance to that. What Steve talks about there is how that harking back to the ephemeral nature of what empire is and all of that thing, and those glory days, and lost greatness or whatever is what opens Trenchard up for manipulation. And of course people's patriotism has been used by people with nefarious intent to whip up all sorts, nationalism, frenzy, unpleasantness, genocide to the greatest extreme, and so obviously satirizing that or showing the folly of that is something that really excited me when I was younger. As I get older, I'm slightly more compassionate towards Trenchard. I do feel pangs of patriotism. I do understand why we like what is familiar. I understand why we are tribal. That doesn't necessarily mean we should allow ourselves to listen to those pulls that pull us towards what is familiar. I'm actually writing a podcast now about why we resist change, and it is because we like what we know. That makes us feel comfortable, and that's why patriotism is such a prevalent thing, because we like what we are surrounded by. As I'm not particularly from a place, although I was brought up in the same place. It always amuses me when Liverpudlians say Liverpool is the best place in the world, Mancunians say Manchester's the best place in the world. You go, is it that, or is it just that's because what you're familiar with, and it's just a massive coincidence that it all so happens to be the best in the world? It might just be that it's because it's what you're used to. And so that always amuses me when people are very, love their hometown the best, despite sometimes it's the most beautiful city in the world, despite much evidence to the contrary. But I'm amused by that, and that interests me. So anything that sort of cocks a snook at patriotism and exposes it for, that it can sometimes be misplaced or hypocritical or flawed or whatever. I'm not as dismissive in the sense that I'm compassionate to where it comes from. I understand, and I actually think there is something to be said. And a bit like this with religion as well, something to be said for subsuming yourself in today's society. What's very interesting is where a lot of young people, particularly, are encouraged to sort of go, well, I'm special, again, despite massive evidence to the contrary. And you find a lot of sort of foot stamping and look at me and listen to me, rather than a sense of community, a sense of duty, a sense of whole, which comes from an adherence to a flag or an idea of a nation or whatever. So whilst I'm aware of how the folly of patriotism, I also think it behoves us to understand where that comes from, and actually the sort of more positive elements of it sometimes, in terms of community, in terms of, as I say, subsuming your own individual needs to that of a greater whole, which is what creates community. So yes, whereas patriotism in its worst can be a bit too inward looking and rejecting of the outside, it can also be protective and nurturing if used correctly. So like a lot of ideas and like a lot of things, there are good in bad, and we shouldn't reject something out of hand because it can be used to manipulate people like Trenchard, or to or to distract us from reality, or to bring out our worst qualities. Like anything, it can also bring out our best and exists for a reason. So I think what the Sea Devils does well is that, whereas as I say, when I was younger, I was like, yeah, that's brilliant because it's having a go at patriotism, which is just like stupid, man. I now go, well, it's great that it sort of satirizes that, the arcane, obsolete empire attitudes of Trenchard, it also sort of has sympathy for them, and I think that's a maturer way of dealing with it. I always use the example of when I said to Russell T Davies, about Midnight, and I went, oh yeah, Doctor Who and the Planet of the Daily Mail people, thinking he'd go, yeah, I hate those people, aren't they awful? And instead he went, well, no, I made the Doctor seem like what he seems to those people, the arrogant. He didn't say this, but what you would say now, the metropolitan elite telling people, ordinary people what to think and how to behave, and coming along as sort of patronising. He says, I'm clever, doesn't he? Because I am clever. And you can see people who work every day of their lives who've got their own thoughts, with having somebody else coming down and saying, yeah, but you think that you're wrong, and I know because I'm essentially better than you. You can see why people go, well, hang on. And so Russell was not satirising or criticising those people in Midnight, even though they are kind of, Daily Mail readery in some of their attitudes and behaviour. He's kinder than that. He's more understanding than that, and that makes it more nuanced. And that means that, yes, you're making a point about a particular sort of ignorance, but he's also, the joke is also on the Doctor, whose own behaviour and deportment and attitude is also flawed and at fault, and which is why he doesn't successfully communicate what he needs to communicate, when in this situation he just happens to be right. So it's always more interesting, I think, when a writer resists the temptation to just fling the bricks in one direction, and I think that's what Malcolm Hulke does there. Although, if it's the Doctor Who after party and you want to throw any bricks in one direction, please do. Right. That was, yes, so that's very... And I got the point. So a third of the way through the Sea Devils, it's even Stevens between myself and Steve Hatcher. We both chose Trenchard, as played by Clive Morton. Yes, Kind Hearts and Coronets. He's also in Olivier's Richard III with Patrick Troughton. So that's Martha Marvellous. I'm very much enjoying the Sea Devils. See how the Doctor escapes from that flung knife and that brilliant camera move, with me making a mental note to say maybe my bonus thing will be the cliffhangers, unless something else strikes my fancy, or I just forget I've done this and choose something terrible. But for now, thank you very much for listening. Thanks to Steve Hatcher, very interesting fellow. Hope you've been enjoying watching the Sea Devils along with me, and that you come to do it for episode 3, which is on the next edition of Happy Times and Places. Thank you so much for listening, and take care. I am extremely grateful to you for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest is Steve Hatcher, who can be found on Twitter at Stephen_Hatcher, and Stephen is with a PH, at Stephen Hatcher. I'd like to thank him and also the patrons who make these podcasts possible and ensure that they remain ad-free. They include Rhys Williams, Rich Wiggins, Peter Ware, Gavin Ware, Alistair Wallace, Jeff Walker, Gary Wales, Lee Wakerley, John Turner, Fan Man Sang, Sidney Trout, Jason Thompson, Paul Taylor Greaves, Adam Stone, David Spofford, David Spencer, Richard Smith, Trevor Smith, Brian Sinclair, Paul Shields, John Sheehan, Frank Shales, Edward Salt, Samuel, Tom Selinsky, Gavin Rymil, John Rumfitt, Darren Rule, and Alex Rowan. The music is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Yes, patrons, you can be one of those by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month you get bonus material, extra releases, and exclusives. You're also 6 months ahead with these, so whenever you're listening to this is old news. Oh my goodness me. I mean, the good sign is that the nuclear war that seems imminent hasn't happened yet, so that's nice. It's a bonus 6 months we've all had. And look, I know times are tough, and if the financial thing doesn't appeal, although if you want to do a one-off, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. If you can't submit yourself to the monthly thing, but occasionally want to chuck me a few pennies, that's a slightly different model that might be more to your way of doing things. However, I understand that finances and times are tough. What costs you nothing is to go to iTunes and to give these 5 stars. That really, really does help, and perhaps a few lines of review as well. And if you're a listener in the States or in Canada or in Australia, I value you very much, and I've always been made to feel very welcome in those places. And, I think particularly American listeners have always responded well to because I sound like you expect English people to sound. But I've just been looking at the graphs, and the vast majority of my listeners are in the UK. So if you're an American Doctor Who fan or an Australian or a Canadian, and you've got mates who you think might like this, tell them! Well, I'm not going to do much for this post-credits thing because I have to go and edit Indefinable Magic 16, which is all about alcohol. And it was all ready to go, and I just gave it one listen, and Audacity now isn't even showing the dropouts, so I have to listen back, and there's 3 or 4 little dropouts, so I just need to drop in takes of those where all the words are complete, and then I can release that to my patrons, who will be expecting it around now. They expected it 13 minutes ago. And it won't have dropped, because when you're a patron, you get 3 releases a week, which means that if you're paying £3 a month, did I work out that was 25p per podcast? That's not bad. So this is 25p's worth to a patron. But this end bit isn't supposed to be a plug for the patron. Sod it, it is today. This is a plug to become a patron. Now, obviously, the next people who listen to this are already patrons, so I'm telling you to do something you're already doing. So you need to do something else, like be nice to a puppy or not tread on a butterfly, and, why not try and achieve world peace while we're at it. Anyway, I hope everybody is very well. I'm gearing up for a 10k run, trying to raise money to send medical aid to Ukraine. By the time non-patrons listen to this, that will be over. Let's hope the war is over too. But if I'm still there in 6 months, I've managed to do the 10k and live to tell the tale. But some subsequent happy times and places, I might be sounding a little puffed. Anyway, I hope when you hear this, the world is a more peaceful place than the one I'm recording it in. Love to you all. Although, actually, hang on, interestingly, this could well be the last Happy Times and Places episode I record, because I've got quite a busy week. I'm doing some Doctor Who DVD commentaries this week, and I've got a couple of writing jobs. So I hope I get time to do some more episodes of The Sea Devils this week. But just in case I don't, this could be the last Happy Times and Places recorded before we know who Jodie Whittaker's successor as Doctor Who is. That's exciting, isn't it? So I expect you all to be writing off to get the autograph of the new Doctor, whoever it may be, H from Steps, perhaps, or Lambert Opic, former MP. Those are I bet they've been suggested in the tabloids somewhere. Lambert Opic is the Doctor. Anyway, no offence to either of those gentlemen. I'm hoping for somebody with slightly more classical theatrical qualifications, but you never know. Well, I think we do. It's not going to be. If it is either of them, well, I did mention Peter Capaldi in my one-man show, My Stepson Stole My Sonic Screwdriver, before he was cast as Doctor Who. So who knows? I could have just made something happen. Dr. H. Ooh, heck.